Aloha. Look who it is. My good friend John Hollinger.
What's
Haven't had
going
him on
on?
in a while. Good to see you in Atlanta. And today we're going to get a little provocative. We are going to redraft the 2021 NBA draft just a few months into the season. Can't think of a better guy to do it with than John Hollinger. Let's roll. And aloha. You're listening to Chad Ford's NBA Big Board on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm with the Athletics, John Hollinger. John's great to have you back on the pod, as always.
Mahalo. Great to be back. Nice to hear the
I'm,
sound of tropical birds again.
yeah, no roosters because it's in the afternoon, not the morning, but we'll see if they make an appearance here. Uh, Want to get eventually to talking an NBA draft with you, and I know you're slowly sort of working through this, but it feels like a good time because there's a lot of discussion right now about this incredible 2021 rookie class that kind of go back and think a little bit about what we thought about this class coming into the draft and then how they performed and put us on the spot, both of us on the spot, by would we do things differently in the draft today now that we've got at least a somewhat decent sample size into the rookie years. Let's just start with this is my assumption. I'm curious if you think the same way. This is a really awesome rookie class.
It is at the top. I think it is. I think we have maybe 5 players who have shown like potential all-star potential already,
Yeah.
right? And all 5 of them are teenagers still, I think, or 20 tops. And so I think from that perspective, it's been really good. I do think we go off the cliff pretty quickly still, which is to be expected a little bit. A lot of these guys in the teens and 20s, they just take a little longer. And then you look back 2 or 3 years later and you're like, wow, okay, that guy turned out to be pretty good. But
But a few second rounders and a few late first rounders that have played pretty well.
yeah, there's been a couple. We'll get into that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I always like the kind pessimism of John Hollinger. He does it with a smile on his face. It doesn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but my guess is he's going to say no to a lot of that. So look, I'm going to be the coward and give you the first pick in the draft. What we're going to do is we're going to rotate picks just through the lottery.
Yeah.
Would we do anything different? And we'll talk a little bit about what we thought at the time and whether that's changed at all. I think both you and I had Cade Cunningham, number 1, on our
Yeah.
big boards coming into the draft. That was consistent for me the whole year. I think it was pretty consistent for you as well. So Detroit Pistons on the clock. Do you select Cade Cunningham with the number 1 pick in the draft if you were to do it all over again?
No, Evan Mobley.
Yeah.
I mean, he's clearly the most talented player. It's funny because I had misgivings about Cade, and um, I still went with him at 1. I liked Mobley and Barnes too, and was kind of torn there. I do think like Cade's rookie year hasn't been that great. He's going to shoot the ball better than he shot it. I mean, that was the one thing I saw watching him. Like his shooting form was so sweet that, I mean, to me, like him turning into like a Chris Middleton type player is a pretty, like, still seems like a pretty, I don't
Safe
know
bet.
if likely is the right word, but an outcome that is pretty easy to envision. Just there's not like that super burst. His handles not super, like especially with the ball in his left hand. He's a little more turnover prone, has a little more trouble finishing in traffic. And I think though all those things were there on his tape at Oklahoma State. But in the absence of somebody to wrest that number 1 spot from him, which guys like Mobley and Barnes didn't quite do in their one season, I think he became kind of the default. But, you look at this season now, I mean, Mobley is the type of NBA big that can play in any kind of game because he's so switchable on defense and because he has a perimeter skill set on offense. And between him and Jared Allen, they've basically just hermetically sealed the paint area for Cleveland. And it's been the key to that whole defense. And he's going to be doing that for the next decade.
And what do you think about him offensively? Defensively, we've talked about Mobley and the switchability and the lateral fluidity of a player that's 7 foot like that it just seems special. what's your grade on him offensively right now coming in? We talked about whether he's going to become a stretch guy. There's a little
Yeah.
bit of evidence of that, but it hasn't maybe
Yeah.
come along as much as we thought. He was pretty good off the bounce at USC. We've got to see some of that a little bit. What
Yeah.
sort of grade do you give him offensively?
Like a B, maybe. Like he's,
Yeah.
he's definitely left little clues and hints here and there of what he can become. But he's not really a low post guy, but he's not really a stretch either. But he does so many other things just in the flow of the game. Like he's a good passer. He gets to pull ups really easily off the dribble for a 7 foot guy. It's kind of amazing. Um, and obviously he is a threat at the rim with his size, length, and whatnot. And so just in the flow of the game, he's able to score and make plays and do some things despite not fitting exactly one of those archetypes that we imagine in our heads. And I think as his game evolves, he's going to take it in one of those directions where he's either fills out, becomes more of a low post guy, or stretches out and becomes more of a 3 point guy.
All right. I think I have to agree with you. Troy Weaver today takes Evan Mobley over Cade. I know that's probably not
Yeah.
going to be popular to hear in Detroit. Detroit fans have been a little bit sensitive
Mm-hmm.
about this, and it's kind of interesting with Cade because he's had a pretty much of a roller coaster ride. Like one night you can see it, the next night you're kind of clenching your teeth a little bit. It's been inconsistent. The other guy, though, that's in the mix here, and I'm just sort of curious, is Scottie Barnes, right? Some of
Yeah.
the advanced analytics actually say he's been better than
Mm-hmm.
Evan Mobley, not defensively, but overall, he's been
Yeah.
better. Like if you look at 538's Raptor or
Mm-hmm.
Darko,
Mm-hmm.
some of those are actually rating Scottie Barnes just a nudge higher than Evan Mobley right now. Any argument at all for Scottie Barnes
I
at one?
I do think there's an argument. The argument is this: players like him, like that 6'8" ball handling, multi positional, like every team is looking for that. Even if they have two of them, they want two more. So the value of those players, especially as you get deeper and deeper into the playoffs, I think escalates. And so I think that's a value proposition for him. The one thing I got to say is that he shot the ball pretty decently so far, and but I think we have to just maintain maybe a little bit of suspicion here that
Mm.
I don't know if we can just go ahead and buy that, you know, full stop and not have any doubts at all there. So
Does
I
body type fit into all this as well? You kind of look at Evan Mobley's, thin frame and what have you, and Scottie, who's more filled out and just long term durability, which I know is part of where you think about this going on. Any advantage Scottie Barnes has that way? They both had some minor injuries, coming into the season, nothing major.
yeah, I probably not. I mean, what people say they worry about injuries with thin guys, but like, is it like, did they really get hurt more? Like, what, you're going to snap them in half? Like that's
Right.
not what happens, right? You don't see this plague of thin guys getting broken bones in the NBA. So
I think it's more watching Chet Holmgren and watching him fall to the ground 15 times a game that maybe has me. And I'm watching a little more
we'll
college,
deal
and
with
you're
that
watching a little
later.
bit more
Yeah.
pro. um, okay. So it's clear Evan. It sounds like it's pretty clear Evan Mobley for you at one.
Yeah, I mean, the one argument for Barnes is again just that like
Yeah.
positional 6'8", 6'9" guy is so valuable in the league right now. But I just think Mobley's been a, a notch better, and he's going to be that kind of big guy who can stay on the floor in any playoff
Hmm.
environment.
One of the interesting things about both him and Scottie Barnes is we also talk about rookies don't really help your team win basketball games. That's
Yeah,
just generally the case. They're not going to help you
yeah,
win. And Evan Mobley's clearly helping the Cleveland Cavaliers
yep,
on this run, and Scottie Barnes is clearly helping the Toronto Raptors this year, which makes you wonder why, especially with Scottie Barnes, he couldn't help Florida State more in his freshman year. But that's the other interesting thing about both of these players is they seem to be not just putting up really interesting and great stats for rookies, but they're actually impacting winning on the court.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to see.
Yeah, it's awesome to see. Okay, well then I'll rotate to the Houston Rockets at 2, who took Jalen Green, which I
Mhm.
know you weren't a big fan of having him
Yeah.
taken this high in the
Yeah.
draft. For those listeners that don't remember, don't want to go back, John was, like he said, very much Evan Mobley or Cade Cunningham, kind of almost like a 1A, 1B thing. And then he had Scottie Barnes at 3. Coach David Thorpe was really the only guy that I knew that was pushing those two as high as that. Jalen Green goes 2. I think of all of the top rookies, he's been by far the biggest disappointment. Coming into the season, I'm gonna give this Scottie Barnes. I'm gonna draft
Yeah.
Scottie Barnes at 2 to Houston.
Clearly.
I'm probably closer to Scottie Barnes at 1 than maybe you are with Evan Mobley,
Mhm.
and but it's a very tough choice because I think they've both been great. And it's really interesting. We've talked a bit about Barnes, and I'm not sure there's much more to say other than the other thing that we knew about Barnes coming in is that his teammates love him, his coaches love him, the fans
Yeah.
love him, the franchises love him. This is a also a player that you can build a culture around. And
Yeah.
and something that I think is there's something infectious about Scottie Barnes and who he is and how he inspires everybody around him to play that you could definitely see Houston needing right now. I'm really glad he ended up in Toronto. To be honest, I think he ended up in a great situation with a good culture on a team where
Yeah.
Houston, it's definitely rockier right
Toronto
now.
Toronto also has a history of fixing bad shooters.
Yeah,
You think about it, does this look the same if Scottie Barnes is in Houston? You can debate that.
yeah, you can absolutely debate it, and it's also interesting that in a certain way, Mobley and Barnes get surrounded by complementary players that allow them to do what they do well without asking them to maybe do stuff that they don't do
Yeah.
particularly well. And that's another argument. So while I would still take, if I was Houston, I'd still take Scottie Barnes. I think it's also sort of fair to say that maybe we don't quite exactly see the same Scottie Barnes in
Mhm.
Houston that we're seeing in Toronto. He landed in the right spot, and we talk
Yeah.
about this with agents all the time. Forget where you're drafted and find the right spot for you. And I think for both Evan Mobley and for Scottie Barnes, their fits with their teams also have been excellent. Evan Mobley may also be having a little bit rougher of a time with that fairly atrocious Detroit team
Yeah.
around him.
Yeah.
Okay, uh, is Jalen Green going to make your lottery?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Then we'll talk about Jalen Green when you get
Okay.
when we finally get there. I
He
know
will
that's a
he will
pretty
be
crazy question to ask
he
about the
is
number 2
not
pick in the draft.
he is not the highest rocket on my board, though.
Oh, we sort of know that because I don't think he was the highest rocket on your board
The
pre-draft
first
either.
time, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Evan Mobley 1 to Detroit,
Mhm.
Scottie Barnes 2 to Houston. Now you're sitting at 3, the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
Is this our German friend Franz Wagner? Is this Alperen Sengun? Is this Cade Cunningham? All of them probably have some claim to this pick.
Josh Giddey could be the pick here
Josh
too.
Giddey as well.
Yeah. Uh, but I am gonna go back to my prior here and go with Cade here.
Okay.
I just have too much belief in his shooting ability, even though his percentage is not great so far. You watch him shoot. I mean, that thing is pure,
Hmm.
and I just have to believe that he's going to be a 40% 3-point shooter at some point.
And he's in a funky situation in Detroit right now as well. And actually, I like Cade in Cleveland. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, Evan's been a great fit there as well. But you could
Yeah.
actually see Cade on this Cavaliers team minus Evan Mobley, and I think that he would be in a better position than he's in Detroit right now.
Yeah, plus the Cavs are running out of guys who can dribble. So yeah,
Yeah.
he'd be in a really nice spot playing next to Garland. Yeah.
Playing next to Garland, being able to stretch the floor a little bit, which we believe he's ultimately going to be able to do. And on certain nights, he's still really showing that as well. Is there an argument here for Wagner, Josh Giddey, maybe even
I think
Jonathan Kuminga and what he's been doing in Golden
yeah.
State lately?
Kaminga, it's a small enough sample that I got to take it with a little bit of grain. Giddy is really interesting, because he's big and he can definitely pass the ball. He's a good rebounder. I think he has to shoot in order to really become a significant player on a high level team. And we just haven't seen that piece of it yet. I mean, Cade, we have so much more trust in his ability to shoot the ball. Um, Franz Wagner has been good. Kind of similar situation to Cade, where he's on a terrible team and has probably more load on him than should be. I don't think he's quite as deft a shot creator, and I don't think he gets into his 3-point shot as easily as Cade does. So I think it's percentage wise, he probably will be okay. I don't think he's going to be as high volume a 3-point shooter as Cade is. So I
Better
would still,
defender
you
than
could
Cade.
argue you could definitely argue that, because I like him defensively and he's bigger and I mean, and even the tape at Michigan showed it. Like, he could do some stuff defensively. I think Cade's fine on defense. I just don't think I don't think there's any specialness there either, though.
Well, look, I'm with you. I think you have to take Cade here, and maybe readjust expectations a little bit at 3 with
Yeah.
Cleveland. So that puts Toronto on the board at 4. Of course, they won't want to give up Scottie Barnes. That's that they made such a, and this is really interesting too, because there was so much talk about, did they take Jalen Suggs or Scottie Barnes here? Raptors fans were livid at the suggestion that they don't take Jalen Suggs. Now they couldn't
they
be
made the
more
right
in love with
call,
Scottie
huh?
Barnes. They really made the right call.
Yeah.
Not that I'm ready to give up on Jalen Suggs either, but I don't think Jalen Suggs gets anywhere near the ceiling that Scottie Barnes is playing with right now, and that's really special. I'm gonna go Franz Wagner here.
Okay.
At 4 with Toronto. I'm tempted by Giddy. I'm also tempted by Jonathan Kuminga. Again, the sample size is small, and there's enough that I'm also hearing just rumblings out of the Warriors camp about how they feel about him. That's got me excited about his future. But one thing I would say about Wagner that's been really interesting is he's been doing this on a really poor team. He's probably had to take on more than he needs to, but he's actually been very steady. If you look at the rookies that have sort of been out there, there's been a lot of roller coasters. Even, Scottie Barnes is going to have, pretty up and down games. Franz has been actually pretty steady throughout this entire season. And his ability to produce and defend and sort of fill out a stat line for them. I think, again, I don't think we're going to probably see Franz Wagner All-Star. I don't know if he gets there. I guess maybe.
He's the guy who makes the All-Star team as the second best player on a 53-win team.
Yeah, like Chris Middleton makes an All-Star team.
Yeah.
And so, Wagner is tempting and Kaminga's tempting. Josh Giddey's tempting to me, but I'm going to go ahead and put Franz at 4. And so I'm going to give you the 5th pick then, which was, let's see, that was Orlando, who took Jalen Suggs at 5. Ironically, their guy at 8 is the guy that probably gets Jeff Weltman and John Hammond the extension.
Orlando, absolutely.
Wasn't Suggs.
Yeah. 100%. So I would go. I had this guy 10th on my original board, but I'm going to move him way up, Josh Giddey. I just think he's been better against NBA competition than I expected from what I saw in Australia. And I had heard stuff from Australia. Everyone liked him down there. I thought he had a chance to be special, and so I might have just missed that one. But question about the shooting is still there. Still plays really upright, which is odd. You'd think he would turn it over more and you'd get his dribble picked more, but you don't really see it happen that much. So I think there's a lot to build on there. Has a pretty decent floater game too. You know who he reminds me of a little? Do you remember Dejan Bodiroga?
Oh, nice name to bring back. Absolutely. That's a really interesting
a shooter,
comp.
But big, could handle the ball, had a little bit of floater game to him. It kind of reminds me of him, but like
absolute superstar.
In an NBA, but like playing in the NBA. And Bodiroga totally could have played in the NBA. It just wasn't a thing that was done as often then. So anyway, it kind of reminds me a little of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like Josh Giddey. And it's what's really fascinating, John, is the things that we were concerned about with Josh Giddey coming in have generally just turned out to be true. Defensively, I think there's some issues there. His shot
Yeah.
hasn't really fallen, but he does the things that he does so well
Yeah.
that it hasn't affected him as negatively as maybe I think coming in. I also had Giddy around the same spot on my big board as I was worried that it might, which again sort of attests to this fact that I think you and I have talked to in the past. When you have one or two skills that are at an elite level, sometimes those can cover up weaknesses more than the toolsy guys that we talk about that do like a
Yeah.
lot of things pretty well, but nothing like at an elite level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see a great example of that right here in Atlanta with Trey Young, right? Because in his draft year, it was like, oh, he's the worst defender I've ever seen. It's like, okay, he's bad on defense, but like he is your offense, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
It's yeah, and it still plays out. You look at his Raptor scores every year, and he's like one of the 2 or 3 top offensive players in the NBA, and one of
Yeah.
the like in the 400s on defense. So the scouting
Yeah.
report was right.
Yeah.
It's just that Trey's so good at something that keeps him on the floor anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's Built Bar time, John.
All
It's New
right.
Year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it, like other protein bars where you can be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical spill. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. By like week 3, you're thinking, this is just not worth it. Where's the chocolate? Built Bars are 100% covered in real chocolate. Those Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So here's an idea for the new year. Go to all your secret treat stashes at home, in the pantry, or in the new year, in the car. Throw them all out and replace them with Built Bars. So you're craving a snack or a treat, you can reach for something that's healthy and tastes incredible. And even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Maybe even eating a Built Bar kind of counts as a workout. And there's so many flavors to choose from: coconut, almond, peanut butter, brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, many more. In fact, Built Bar is always coming up with new and limited flavors. So check out Built.com often to see what's new. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your first order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. All right, John. Built Bar, filling our stomachs, paying our bills. We've gone through the first 5 picks in the
All right.
draft. I think there can be some reasonable shifting around Giddy or Franz Wagner or what have you, but I don't.
Yeah.
I would say most reasonable people are probably going to come up with those 5 in some order going forward. So we're at
Completely agree.
6. We're at the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
Can't argue that Josh Giddey just went ahead of them. So this was they kind of had a bit of a surprise here. I'm gonna buy the Kaminga stock.
Okay.
Uh, he's young. You're right. The sample size is limited. I don't think the G League performances that he put up were necessarily awe-inspiring. But there's a couple of things that are really interesting. One, per 36 minutes, he's the leading scorer in the draft right now. When he gets on the floor, he puts up points for
Mm-hmm.
Golden State. I think he does that well, and he's been a plus on the defensive end for them, which I think is, again, for a player as young as he is, not necessarily something that you would expect. And so, those two factors together, obviously the physical tools are all there as well. The fact that he is not a negative on the defensive end when he's out there for the Warriors, and his scoring ability make me feel like he's going to turn into something. Now, the jump shot is the big question, and probably the swing skill for him on what he ultimately becomes. He hasn't shot the ball particularly well in the early going for Golden State. If that comes, then I think Jonathan Kuminga could be a potential all-star someday. If he's not, then he's sort of the energy guy, that uses his athleticism to impact the game in different ways. But I'm going to go Kuminga at 6. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I think that's reasonable. I had one other guy ahead of him, but yeah, I had him 8th on my original board, and I think he's I think the way he's played, he's certainly moved himself up and not down, right? It
Yeah.
hasn't been a ton of minutes, but like it's been like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. And there's not a lot of guys that so far that you could say that about. So
And
I,
it's
I
not like he's playing on a team that just needs to force feed him minutes. Like he only
yeah,
gets on the floor if the Warriors think that he can help them. And I think he's
or if the rest of the team has COVID,
yeah. And I think there
but
was some of that. But
yeah,
the last couple of games, I don't actually think that that's totally
no,
been the
he's
case for
yeah,
him.
those were like legit earned minutes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so I think that's also sort of saying something. How many of these rookies gets 20 minutes a night on the Warriors? We got to believe Evan Mobley would, Scottie Barnes probably would, Cade Cunningham probably would, but after that, I'm not really sure.
yeah,
Okay, it's the 7th pick in the draft.
yeah.
Let's see who was 7th. The Golden State Warriors.
So they took Kaminga. They took
Kaminga. They took
Kaminga
7th.
They're probably happy with that. But
there hasn't been a big shift other than Jalen Green falling out, and I guess Jalen Suggs falling out now.
This guy would actually be really cool to watch on the Warriors.
Okay. This
the
is
number
guy.
one
is
Houston Rocket on my board. I've waited far too long already to Alperen Sengun.
Okay.
You can see why some teams didn't want to take him, because defensively there are some moments where he ends up looking really bad. He still lunges at guys on the perimeter all the time, and every time he lunges, he gets blown by. He has some pretty decent instincts. Other way, like he's got a high steal rate. He's able to block shots at the rim. He gets off the floor actually better than I expected from the tape I saw from Turkey. And he is a daring passer right now, too daring, but periodically freaking brilliant. And I think the brilliant part is going to win out as he gets older. I mean, even as a teenage rookie coming from Turkey, player efficiency rating of 18, playing fairly significant minutes on a bad team. Those guards aren't helping him at all. All his shots are self-created, basically. So I think it's been a pretty good run for him so far, and I think he still has a lot of runway to get better, develop more of a three-point shot, develop more craft operating off the elbows and stuff. Like he could be a really tricky guy that way. And I mean, at this point where we are now, I mean, we're kind of running out of names of guys who've done anything. So I think he has to be the pick here.
I think so too. I think the biggest mystery in Houston is why he isn't getting more minutes, especially given just where the Rockets are at right now. I think the other big mystery is, he was a bit of a polarizing name with pretty much anybody that uses analytics as part of their equation, pointing to Sengun and saying, I think he's going to be really good, right? I think that was kind of the consensus. And then I think some other people that maybe use their guts or their eyes or scouting reports, wondering a little bit about the athleticism, what have you. He's clearly kind of played out, I think, the way that the John Hollingers of the world projected and predicted. How did the Thunder miss on Sengun? Because he actually seems like he's a Thunder type of player. They didn't have any size. They trade this pick to the Rockets, but they've got a gazillion picks anyway.
Yeah, I think they really index highly on athleticism there, especially with their front court players.
But then they draft Jeremiah Robinson Earl at 31.
That's true. That's true. Traded up from 34 and 36 for 32.
Right. Who's a worse athlete than Sengun.
He wasn't going to get to 34. What are we doing here? Anyway, I digress. Yeah.
And Trey Mann's not that great of an athlete either. And they kind of reached a little bit for him.
Yeah.
And they took Josh Giddey, who's not, I mean, if they passed on Kaminga for Josh Giddey. So I agree historically that has been the case for that team. But this whole draft, they actually went the opposite direction on that.
You're right. They kind of did. Yeah. I didn't understand that trade. I didn't understand like the 5 teams ahead of that trade passing on Sengun I think some pretty marginal guys were taken in those spots ahead of him. So I don't know. That
Well,
was
had to
I
kill
think.
you that the Memphis Grizzlies passed on him
Oh my
at
god,
10 for
yeah.
Zaire Williams, a guy
Let's
that I don't think you had in your top 30.
I did have him in my top 30, but I had him, I want to say, like right at the tail end of that.
Yeah.
27 maybe.
Yeah.
Uh
This is
so
like a
anyway.
really great drafting team that everybody's talking about the Grizzlies right now and how well they've done in the draft. Maybe it's just been they're so far removed from John Hollinger now that they're starting to mess up the draft.
I don't think I had anything to do with either of the last couple, but the bit, I mean, the Desmond Bain pick, they hit out of the park. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no question about that. But yeah, I had Zaire 30th, so yeah, I was hoping they would take Sengun there.
Yeah, just interesting because there were some good drafting teams in that mix. San Antonio often historically drafts well as well. That passed on Shingun, and
I really
I don't
thought
think you can
San
call this a
Antonio
surprise.
loves bigs, loves foreign guys,
Yeah,
loves like goofy characters, right? Like I thought he would be like perfect for them. And yeah, they took Josh Primo instead.
yeah, and and that was probably one of the biggest surprises in the draft. I can't even remember where you had Primo.
I
Um,
had him way down there. You know, it's funny. I talked to people after the draft. I had Primo 42nd. I talked to people after the draft, and a lot of them had him higher than I did, or that other publicly, out there sites did. I talked to a lot. I didn't talk to anyone who had him 12th, but I talked to a lot of people who had him like 17th, 23rd, 20th,
mm,
So I do think that if San Antonio didn't take him there, he was coming off the board in maybe the next, say, 10 to 12 picks.
right, which makes it not
So
as
in
big a reach
retrospect,
as
it makes
yeah.
it less of an outlier than it looked like at the time.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go to Orlando at 8, who took Franz Wagner with this pick, but Franz Wagner's off the board here. Am I crazy to just go ahead and give them the guy they took at 5, Jalen Suggs? Defensively, he's been a plus on that end of the ball. I think we all thought Davion Mitchell was going to be the best, guard defender early on, but I actually think the numbers support Suggs there over Davion Mitchell, and that at some point he doesn't just shoot the ball as horrifically as he's shot it early on in Orlando, and he's looked better coming back from the injury than he did earlier in the season. Is Suggs make your top 10? Because I'm sort of erring towards Suggs at 8 here.
So I had Suggs 10th. I had him 6th when I originally did this. I was a little concerned about him offensively, running pick and roll and shooting, behind screens and stuff. And that's borne out so far. But again,
Right.
he's a one and done who's playing point guard now in the NBA. Rookie point guards in the NBA usually get their butts kicked. We usually don't see a real change until the second year. We're seeing it with Cole Anthony this year in Orlando.
Right.
And so I'm not willing to write him off yet. And I do think the defense will be there, and he doesn't have to get to that high a level offensively to have some kind of value as an NBA player. So yeah, I think we're definitely in the range on him, because we're out of this like top 7 guys where you feel really good about them being long-term starter or better. And now we're into a different, much more speculative area of the lottery.
Okay. So I take Jalen Suggs at 8. That leaves the Sacramento Kings at 9. Davion Mitchell was definitely mentioned in this range where he was drafted. I don't know that I heard anybody mention him to the Kings when they had Tyrese Halliburton, De'Aaron Fox. I think that was a draft night surprise.
They had DeLon Wright too. Remember,
DeLong Wright, Buddy Hield. The guards were not the issues, though. Then they went off in the summer and got like 7 centers as well. Davion Mitchell, I think that the concern was the age, and was he going to do enough else? He's been okay. I think in Sacramento, I think he's definitely helped them defensively, which is partly why they drafted him. I'm guessing he's not the 9th pick. For you.
I just think there are too many offensive limitations with him. He's a little small. The shot's okay, but he doesn't really get all the way to the basket that easily. Hasn't just hasn't been an impactful player at that end. And again, at his age, works against him too. I would actually go Jalen Green here.
Okay.
I mean, right now, let's not, like, they're playing him 30 minutes a game. Like, he is not a good basketball player right now, but there is so much athleticism in him. And, that springiness, if he shoots it all, I think he's going to be able to score 20 points a game. So I still have enough. I had him fifth on my original board. I still have enough belief here where he has to stay in the top 10.
I agree with you. I think it's too early to write him off. I think we see this every year where we say we got to be patient with these young guys, and then we're not patient when they come in and they look terrible. But I think you're right. The physical tools are there. I do question, this was a legitimate question coming into the draft, what else is he going to do in the NBA besides score? Rebound? Is he going to handle the ball a bit? Is he going to defend? I haven't really seen much evidence of him doing any of that stuff in Houston.
I mean, I was hopeful for him at the defensive end, and it hasn't really been there yet, but
Yeah.
it's a tough thing to evaluate on that team a little bit. And I still have hope with his athleticism, and there seems to be some desire on the defensive end too, even if he can't quite pull it off yet. So I guess I'm still a little optimistic there.
Does this change our view of, G League Ignite, first year of really evaluating them for draft prospects? I think a lot of people, I don't know if you were in this camp, thought, look, the level of competition that they're playing at, NBA sets or whatever, this is going to be a better tell from a scouting standpoint than just playing college basketball every night. And Jalen Green had a fairly successful, wasn't great, but a fairly successful for an 18-year-old.
He had a better year
session.
He had a better year than Kaminga did. Yeah, exactly.
Though Kaminga was a year younger.
We think.
Yeah, we think. Okay. So does this tell us anything? I mean, how are you feeling? You're evaluating G League guys this year. I don't think any of them rise quite to the level of a Kaminga or Jalen Green in this year's draft. Does it recalibrate anything for you, seeing what Jalen Green's going through in the Rockets?
See, I guess I actually had in my own head what the calibration was from seeing rookies sent down to the G League and how they played and what that translated to for their pro prospects. Okay. And so I was a little worried about both those guys that they didn't play a little better than they did. And
so you're super bullish on this year's G League Ignite prospects then.
Well, yeah, no, Dyson Daniels has been all right.
Okay.
And actually, well, I mean, but Beauchamp, the thing is you have to adjust for the fact that he's older too. So that makes it a little more tricky because he's been a pretty decent G League player. It's just like if you're 21 versus 18, it's a different,
right.
It's just a different thing. It is. But I guess that made it harder for me to like putting Green second after the year he had in the G League was that was really felt like a stretch to me. So
is this a case you think the Rockets fell into this like franchise marketing, exciting, athletic, high flying player as opposed to just drafting the best basketball player? Do you think that they fell victim to that at 2?
I don't know, but I mean, Detroit was looking at Green at 1. Remember,
they were
so
there was an internal struggle in Detroit for sure. That it's still rumbling in Detroit over that. I would not want to be one of the guys that was strongly advocating for Jalen Green right now in Detroit.
Yeah, and so I think people just got carried away with some of the high end stuff on Green. And there just wasn't enough there behind it. And look, like he could easily turn out to be Zach LaVine. I mean, right? Because Zach LaVine was kind of the same thing where he was this pogo leaper who wasn't actually a good player at UCLA, but just he did stuff where you're like, holy crap.
He could shoot threes and dunk.
Yeah. And so, and it took him a while to get where he is now, but you go back and when we redid that draft, I think we ended up with him at number 3 or something, right?
Yeah.
So And Green could end up getting to that point too. I'm a little more suspicious of his shot, though. I don't like his shooting form.
Mm. Okay, that's the first 9 picks in the draft. When we come back, we'll finish out the lottery. We're listening to John Hollinger of The Athletic and Chad Ford. This is Chad Ford's NBA Big Board. All right, we're back. Memphis Grizzlies on the board at 10 took Zaire Williams. Another big surprise, guy that preseason, before the college basketball season, was thought to be a potential top 10 pick in the draft, had a terrible year at Stanford. Interestingly, BJ Boston, who was kind of ranked right next to him, also has a terrible year at Kentucky. Maybe not actually, frankly, as bad as Zaire did. And he goes in the 50s. Zaire goes at 10. Grizzlies fall in love with him. Hasn't been very good. He's actually getting minutes, which is another huge surprise for Memphis, that they're finding ways to force feed him minutes and still win basketball games.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Early in the year, they were force feeding him minutes and losing basketball games. And then I think, on this run lately, they've kind of put him back in the lineup, and he basically kind of keeps the starting spot warm until Dillon Brooks returns. And then they get into their bench and Anderson and Conchar come in or whatever. He's been a little better lately, but I still wouldn't say he's been good. Now, again,
it took us to the 41 minutes to get Dillon Brooks' name mentioned, just to note.
Did you know that he was taken with the 45th pick?
I didn't know. And did you have anything to do with that, John?
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
Do you get personally upset when you start to hear Dillon Brooks trade rumors? I've heard some Dillon Brooks sort of trade stuff around Memphis. Does that feel like someone's hurting your child?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, we already traded Conley, so that that was the one.
That was hard.
It happens.
If only the Grizzlies could bring Paul Reed in a deal.
Now that might be something. Yeah, like Brooks for Reed and Sengun somehow, 3-team trade.
Yeah. Well, no, all 3 of them on Memphis. I just don't know that we'd ever get you watching any other team.
That would be a problem. Yeah.
All right. So I think we're both of the agreement that this was a reach at 10 for Zaire. Still feels like a reach. Yeah. Is he going to make your top 14?
He did not, although by the time I got to 14, he just as easily probably could have as some of these guys I picked. I mean, the last few were kind of a barrel scrape. So,
part of it is we're starting to sort of run out of the young guys.
Yeah.
That are going to be particularly good, have a bright future. And we're kind of left with a bunch of older players, some of which who've actually played pretty well, but have sort of limited upside. And at 10, how you feel about drafting those guys in a normal draft. I think normally you and I would sort of say those guys should be reserved for later in the draft. So that kind of put me in a tough position. I'm not really sure at 9 who is going to be my guy. And so I'm just going to swing for upside. I'm going to trust San Antonio a little bit here. I'm going to trust some of the flashes that I've seen, and I'm going to put Josh Primo here and say, if you're going to reach for a young guy and really swing for the fences, I feel like Primo might have been a better bet than Zaire Williams.
Yeah, that's interesting. He's shown some stuff on the ball. He's smaller than Zaire Williams. But you see some stuff with him on the ball. You see some, I was surprised when I watched the G League Ignite in person, his leaping ability, on rebounds, was oh, you could do that. Mm-hmm. So that was good. The shot seems like it'll come around. So there's something projectable there. He's just not really an NBA player yet. So it's and there's 15 to 20 guys from this draft you could say that about, and we're not going to really know for a while, which ones were the keepers and which ones were not. But I think at this point, I mean, he, along with a few other guys, is probably as reasonable a pick as anything. We're almost to the point in the draft where there are no bad takes anymore, basically.
Right.
Because we're all speculating on future now, basically.
Okay. So we're at 11.
Yep.
And now we're at at San Antonio,
Uh-huh.
who took Primo. We just took him away from him after everybody freaked out that he went 12. Or actually, no, he went 12. So 11th is Charlotte. Sorry. We're at
James
Charlotte.
Booknight.
James Bouknight, who in fairness, James Bouknight has had a hard time getting on the floor.
Witness
In
protection
Charlotte.
program. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, a little bit surprised. Thought he would get a little bit more playing time than he's gotten
Yeah.
in Charlotte, but he hasn't gotten it early on. Who's your selection with the 11th pick of the Charlotte Hornets?
So I'm going to move somebody up here. I originally
Okay.
had him 23rd on my board.
Okay.
Herbert Jones.
Okay. Yeah, I think Herb Jones fans were going to have a heart attack on this if we
Yeah.
didn't start bringing in Herb Jones, who has legitimately had a terrific season for the Pelicans, especially defensively.
Yeah, exactly. Good defender on a bad defensive team. Starts at the 4 mostly, but a multi-positional defender. The worry was that he would just be too tragic on offense with the iffy shooting and the turnover proneness. He's been all right. His shot's coming around. Again, New Orleans has a track record of turning bad shooters into shooters. And so I think he landed in a good spot. And I think he's clear. He's an older player, but there's still upside there in him because offensively he can still get better. And I think at this point you're going to say like he's going to make it, right? Like he's going to be something in the league for a while. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with him at wherever we're at 11 now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So Chad's reckless and swings for an 8, the youngest player in the draft who hasn't done anything. Yep. And then John plays it safe by saying, okay, here's a 22, 23-year-old who is actually starting and being productive and helping, the Pelicans aren't winning a lot of basketball games, but that's not Herb Jones's fault.
Yeah.
I think this is another thing about Herb Jones as well. He's the type of player, we talked about this with Scottie Barnes, that every team in the league covets, right? A guy that defensively can defend multiple positions on the floor.
Yeah.
He can handle the ball a bit.
And especially
not a great shooter.
If he can shoot, like that is such a game changer for him. Yeah.
So we've dipped into the second round now, and you had him at 23. A lot of people talked about Herb Jones as a potential first round pick. I think the offensive limitations did scare some people away. So it's interesting that he slides as far as he does, because I think again, if we did a redraft, probably 10 to 15 would be the Herb Jones's range at this point. But I think it was 34th in the draft. This is Chad stalling now. Like we talk about this really great draft, but you start to say, okay, San Antonio, who's your guy at this point? And I'm torn between a number of players here, but I'm just going to go pick my favorite player.
Okay.
Right now, Bones Highland.
Wow. Okay.
I'm going to take Bones. He looks to me like he is going to be a 6-man microwave scorer in the NBA. It seems like he's going to be able to maybe carve out a career like Jordan Clarkson has, in Utah. That's my early take on what he's been able to do. He shot the basketball really well. He's slithery and crafty. I don't know that he ever ends up being a good starter in the NBA, but I really liked the role that he plays in Denver, and I could see him again staying in the league a long time, providing exactly that role off the bench.
That's probably a good call. I mean, he's been more productive than some of the other guys we're looking at here, and it's projectable, right? Like he's playing this role on a good team and has to fit into like a real organization trying to do stuff. And he hasn't been amazing, but again, as a rookie point guard, he's been playable. Like things don't break down when he checks in the game. They're able to keep doing what they're doing. As long as Jokic still stays on the floor, I should say.
And I don't think
the entire house of cards collapses in Denver, but that's a completely different discussion.
And I don't think the jumper's going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the kind of slithery nature, the crafty nature of his game is going anywhere either. Again, does that project into a superstar? Probably not. But I think at 12th, you can do a lot worse than getting a guy that could end up being at some point in his career a legit candidate for 6 Man of the Year.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's 12. 13th, Indiana Pacers.
All
I
right.
think people are going to be surprised that we haven't talked about the guy that they took at 13, which is Quist Duarte, who you were high on, despite the fact that he broke about every age rule
Yeah.
that we could really talk about in the draft. I think he's 24
Yeah.
right now. And he has had some really good games. The other night, he had a really big game, for Indiana. Uh, is he your selection here at 13?
He's been fine. I could just as easily take him here, but I actually think for somebody as old as he is, you actually wanted to see a little more than he's done
Hmm.
to this point. Um, I'm gonna go a little bit off the grid here. This guy's hardly played, but I still believe in Jared Butler.
Okay.
Uh,
I
I
like
I
that.
I just think he'd be a really good guard in the league, and from what he's done in the G League, what he did in preseason, like I still think that I still think he has that in him. So I'm gonna stay on Jared Butler Island here.
And that's about where you had him
I
ranked,
had
right?
I had him 11th when I originally did my board. So yeah,
And his fall on draft night seemed ridiculous.
it was it
Uh,
was. It, I mean, medical was basically 90% of it, I think. But I do think even beyond the medical, I think teams didn't quite have the level of belief in him that I did. Maybe I think teams
hmm.
were probably, if you took out the medical, teams were probably looking at him more like in the 20s, maybe than in the. I don't know if any teams had him 11th. Let's say.
I
I
think
don't
that's
know.
a
Tell
really
me if I'm
that,
wrong. I mean, you're talking to these
no,
teams on
no, but
draft night.
the Jazz were a team that, for example, were very high uh,
Mhm.
on him, and you think about Dennis Lindsey and his connections to Baylor and everything else.
Mhm.
They were very high on him, and it was really interesting, talking to that team pre the draft on draft night.
Mhm.
They didn't believe it was possible that he was going to slide to them. And I think the Jazz had the 30th pick. They ended up trading out of it, and they traded a couple of times before they actually got
Yeah.
Jared Butler. And that was mostly for cap reasons, and picking up some second round pick assets and some things like that. But they didn't seem to have serious medical concerns, and that was one of the interesting things of why they were pushing back, because they'd done a lot of homework on him, that
Mhm.
they were really surprised that he would fall that far just based off of how they were reading the medical and seeing the medical. So,
Yeah.
um, and I don't think any of the reasons that he's not playing have had anything to do with the medical. The reason he didn't play in summer league is just that he'd been sat so long because of everything. I think the Jazz just decided to take
Yeah.
it slow with him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jazz fans will love hearing that that Butler could end up being the 13th best pick in this draft. I'm just going to go for the guy who's obviously had a pretty strong rookie season, even at 24 years old, and say I still think Chris Duarte is going to be in the league a long time.
Okay.
Uh,
That's
I think
fair.
he's maybe not as long as other guys because he's already 24 years old, but maybe for the next 6 or 7 years,
Yeah.
he's going to be in the league. And I also think that his role has shifted a bit in Indiana, sort of back and forth. And I think Rick Carlisle is kind of a difficult coach to play for a rookie, no matter where you're at. I was
Mhm.
hoping I was going to put like Miles McBride or somebody here. Some of those guys that I kind of believed in. I think you believed in Miles McBride as well.
I
I
was a big
haven't
McBride
really
guy,
seen it
but he
yet.
hasn't. Yeah. Yeah.
Haven't seen it
I
yet.
when I've watched McBride, I gotta say, like he doesn't really get separation as a point guard, so he has to be a guy who shoots and is a total bulldog defender, I think.
So let's just quickly go through a few guys that we didn't take. We took a lot of guys that
Mhm.
that were drafted a lot. Davian Mitchell, he makes your top 20, top 15.
Probably my top 20. I want to say I had him 16 when I originally did this,
Mm,
and I think I probably wouldn't like really change that.
okay.
Like that's kind of feels like that's right. Yeah, Adam 16th. Yeah.
Okay. James Booknight went 11th, the Charlotte.
I had him 13th. Uh Even like his few cameos, I haven't really been moved, I guess.
Okay.
I'm a little worried about this one.
Okay. Zaire Williams went 10th to the Grizzlies.
Yeah, I'd him rated in the 20s. So yeah, that and he hasn't done anything to really move me off of that position. So
Okay.
I I, I thought that was a pretty easy one to kind of leave out of my top 14.
Moses Moody goes 14 to Golden State Warriors. Admittedly, I don't think they're giving big minutes to two rookies, and he hasn't gotten in the game much there for Golden State. What do you think about Moody? He was one of the younger players in the draft.
I know. I had him 14th. I still kind of like the idea of him. His minutes haven't been good, so it's hard for me to like move him up from there. But I'm not out on him by any means.
Corey Kispert.
Yeah, another guy. I had thought about him actually at the back end of this. He's playing more for Washington. You could tell he's starting to figure it out where his shots are going to come from and how he can kind of play his game at the NBA level versus what he did at Gonzaga. I still, the shot release is still a little low, which makes him less of a threat as like a movement shooter than some of these other guys. But he is big. He can do some stuff going to the basket. Yeah, and like I said, he's been playing more lately. You can see him starting to figure stuff out. You can see the coaches are trusting him more. I think he's going to end up being a rotation player.
Interesting. You were skeptical about Trey Murphy. He looked great in the summer league and hasn't done much for New Orleans. It looks like you're given that he's a Virginia alum and I sort of trust you on these Virginia guys that you might have been right about that. So let's talk about one other guy that I know we're going to get some hell about because he just put up a monster game for the Chicago Bulls coming off the bench. Ayo Dosunmu.
Yeah, I just didn't have the like body of work from the whole season to really feel amazing about that. I had him on my list of like guys when I got into the teens of like, okay, here's a guy I could look at because when I picked Butler, I could have just as easily picked Kispert or Ayo or Jalen Johnson, who I had 9th on my original board, but he's been in witness protection with the Hawks. So it was just a point. I could have gone with any of those guys. Ayo's a little older. Still wonder about the shooting piece a little bit, but
shooting 44% from 3 and 54% from the field right now.
Yeah, I know, but yeah. Good. Like defensively, he's looked the part. He rebounds. He definitely looks an NBA athlete and a guy who'll be able to get on the floor though. Again, an older guy and hasn't had the production of like a Herb Jones, for instance. But these last few games, they've been notable without a doubt.
All right. He's John Hollinger. Check him out, The Athletic. John, next time we talk, we're gonna dive in the 2022 draft.
All right.
You about ready? You got your big board starting to firm it up?
Not even. I mean, crap. This year, man, that board starts getting squishy around 5 or 6.
It is. I'm not quite as bullish on this year's draft as I was last year's draft for sure. All right, we'll get back with John Hollinger soon. We'll check out his big board when it gets a little bit firm. Seems a little squishy right now.
Absolutely.
And you can go over to my site, NBABigBoard.com, where you can see my first mock draft of the year. He's John Hollinger. You've been listening to Chad Ford's NBA Big Board on the Locked On Podcast Network. Aloha.